Okay, we'd like to welcome everybody out to this month's training for research faculty, which is going to be focused in on laboratory safety. The goal of today is going to be to help everybody understand a little bit more about what a hazard assessment is, how to do it, and ultimately help you progress towards actually getting stuff done. And can I ask you to do me a favor?
Yeah.
Let's gather all the stuff on the front row and disperse it to the back where people actually are going to sit.
We're supposed to sit in the front. Come on, Jeff.
We have good handouts here in the front, but I just noticed that. Leaving that done. So we put together a very diverse panel of people because what we want to do is we want to define a research laboratory as anywhere where research occurs. So we have people from all over. We were discussing it a little bit earlier. There's no way to get somebody from every possible research area on campus simply because that would entail every single research faculty member on campus because there's just enough difference as we go about things. So hopefully this broad spectrum of experts that we've compiled or put together today will get pretty close to your area. So let me introduce people as we go on down here. I'm going to start at the very far end. We'll probably have to read this so that I get it right. We have Gary Stewardson from Agricultural Systems Technology and Education, who has been with Utah State University for 30 years. He is in the Engineering and Technology Education program, where this is a very interesting program because it originally started in the College of Engineering, but is now housed in the College of Agriculture and Applied Science. Gary has been awarded the Teacher of the Year twice. He's also been awarded Advisor of the Year twice. So as you can see, Gary's focus is on the student and how they learn. His research interests center around, and he has published 20 papers on using industrial arts and technology to engage students in learning. One of the things about safety, Gary's setting up the hydroponics laboratory, and they were transporting buckets of acids and bases from his lab to the next lab. And they said, wait a minute, wouldn't it be easier just to mix up the acids and bases right where we're using them? So he was able to completely eliminate one of the hazardous steps involved simply by looking at how can we do this safer. Next we have Rob Allenbaugh from the Chemistry and Biochemistry Department. He's a very recent addition to Utah State University, coming in within the last year to take over undergraduate chemistry labs and the 800 or nearly 800 students. So Rob, even though, where are we here? He comes to USU from the Pharmacology and Toxicology Department at the University of Otago, New Zealand. And while Rob is an analytical chemist, his true focus is on chemistry education. Rob's approach to safety is through example. You will never find him in a lab without a lab coat and safety glasses on. And nobody, this comes from my people that go out in the labs all the time and talk to people. It said nobody will ever confuse that they didn't know what they were supposed to be wearing in the lab, because Rob always reminds them and is always an example of exactly how they should be doing it. Moving on, we have Susanna French from the Biology Department, who has been here for 10 years, studying how organisms regulate and maintain key life history processes. Her current research is on the impact of human disturbances on natural physiological processes, which takes her out into the field to collect samples and make observations. She does all this field work while simultaneously maintaining a large laboratory here on campus. Susanna was one of the first researchers in the biology department to formulate a written safety protocol for field activities that has been used and has been taken on by most of the people in the chemistry or biology department as they go out into the field. Additionally to that, this is what everybody should be aware of and what you're getting into. Her 63-page chemical hygiene plan covers hazard assessment and safety protocol for every activity that she does in her laboratory. Now, this is a laboratory, has 2 complete labs, has 5 undergraduates, has 5 graduates, and we couldn't even count how many collaborators that come and go in and out of this lab. So now we have Brian Gowan, Animal Dairy and Veterinary Sciences, has been with USU for almost 16 years, and within his first 6 years was named as the College of Agriculture and Applied Sciences Researcher of the Year. He specializes in antiviral therapies and treatments for hemorrhagic fever agents, viral infections, modeling viral diseases, and virus host cell interactions. Thus, he works with some of the nastiest little bugs around. This work requires a heightened level of awareness and respect for the associated hazards. Now, add into that the unpredictability of doing that in a live animal, and you know a little bit about the hazards that he's facing in his lab every day. Brian has been a member of the Biohazards Safety Committee here at USU for 12 years and took over as chair of that committee 2 years ago. So in this position, he's able to take the expertise that he has in his lab and spread it out throughout all of the departments out there that need help. So with that, if I were to ask everybody a simple question, how safe is your laboratory? I think everybody would say, my laboratory is safe. Working in a laboratory at a university is really safe. It's not like mining or, for that matter, building a skyscraper. We're pretty safe. But that doesn't mean that accidents don't happen. In fact, on average, over here, on average, well, over the past 20 years, 27 people have died in the United States in university-related research laboratory accidents. Here's the list of all 27 of those people and pictures of 4 of the more famous ones. Also, in an average year, 5,000 people go to the emergency room from research laboratories in the United States. So even though we're pretty safe, things aren't totally safe. If we go back to 2018 in Utah, just at Utah State University, we see that there were 19 emergency room visits just from this campus. So people are going to have accidents. That's all there is to it. If what we're asking everyone to do is to do a hazard assessment, look inside your lab and say what's going on. With this simple activity, we're hoping that we're going to be able to reduce the number of accidents that happen every year. So what is a hazard assessment? And what we're going to talk about today is simply a 4-step process. You see 6 steps on your handout. But if we looked at the 4 steps, 1, what do you do? 2, what part of that can hurt you? 3, develop a plan to be safe. And 4, and most importantly for me anyways, to communicate that with everybody around you. So with that, I want to turn this over. This is a discussion. This only works if we have a discussion. We have the panel members here with the expertise. They're waiting for your questions. We don't need that quite yet. So I want to start this with one question to all of the panel members, and they can decide what order they want to address this in. But have you ever worked in a laboratory or personally acquainted with a laboratory where an accident has occurred? And if you could, discuss how that changed your attitude towards safety.
Do you want me to start?
You guys can choose. Yes, Brian, please.
Yes, many accidents. When you work with infectious agents, needles, modeling disease in rodents. There's considerable risks associated with that type of work. Fortunately, we mitigate those to reduce the frequency considerably. Every time an incident occurs, we carefully review that up at the highest level with the investigators within our institute. We have discussions with the senior technical staff to get their input. It's so important to get feedback from those in the trenches that can really appreciate all the nuances and challenges associated with actually physically doing the work, as opposed to those investigators that spend a lot of time sitting in office chairs that may not have a full appreciation of all the different risks. Although we were there at one point in time, we become far removed and less in tune with those hazards. So in terms of how these different accidents or incidents have affected my view on safety, I guess I'll try and be brief. I'll just take a step back from saying that initially in undergraduate, graduate training, safety, it was there, it was in the background, it just wasn't as prominent as it is this day and age. When I began my postdoctoral training, there was a point in time when I began working with agents for which there are no therapeutics, multi-drug resistant mycobacterial tuberculosis. Started working in higher containment labs, appreciating really the risks and the heightened safety that goes into that type of research. Moving from there to Utah State, starting to focus on viruses. Again, a lot of the agents we work with, there are no vaccines or therapeutic treatments, so it's really, I liken it to if you were rock climbing. You know, with a lot of the work that's done, there are some safety nets in terms of if you're exposed to certain agents, there's antibacterials that could help resolve an issue. Once you start working with agents for which there are no treatments, no therapies, and high containment, that's essentially free soloing or climbing without ropes, if you will, because a mistake could really be of high consequence. So I really view safety as just so important because I recognize the potential consequences of having mistakes that could lead to a dire situation. So I'll stop there so I don't consume too much of the time.
Yeah, working in a large, with a large number of students. I mean, we've all worked with students. We know that. We've all been students, and that can be interesting and pose a lot of new circumstances, a lot of new instances that come up. One of the instances that I had occur actually happened when I was quite early on in the game in the education and in helping out with educational labs. We had a summer lab going on, and this was in California. Typical lab, student in this case was working with concentrated sulfuric acid. They're working that in a fume hood, and they're pouring from a 2.5 liter jug, if you will, the kind that has the ring on the neck that you can put your finger through. And the student is pouring it into a beaker in the hood, and his hands must have been wet or something like this, and his hand slipped off the bottom of this 2.5 liter jug of concentrated sulfuric acid. And the jug swung on his finger, it caught the lip of the fume hood, and it sheared the bottom of that jug off. And the kid had 2.5 liters of concentrated sulfuric acid immediately on his jeans. Now, the instructor at the time did exactly what he was trained to do, and he pulled the student under the shower, the safety shower in the lab. and turned it on. Now, if you're familiar with concentrated sulfuric acid, you may know that it's highly exothermic in water. It gets very, very, very hot, and it'll boil. And this is exactly what happened in this particular case. And so the student is under the shower trying to wash off the sulfuric acid on his jeans, and it's getting very, very hot. So he's getting out of the shower, and he's into the shower, and he's out of the shower, and into the shower. And by the time the ambulance had arrived, he had lost most of his jeans and ended up with both thermal and chemical burns. Now, I mean, that's a pretty horrific example, but it did teach me a lot of things. And one of the things it taught me was the importance of lab jackets. At that time, lab jackets were not used in the educational labs, full stop. It also taught me the ideas of thinking through these things a little bit more. Okay, do we need to have a 2.5 liter jug? No, I minimize all my container sizes now. Do we have to have a breakable jug? No, I put a lot of my things in plastic now. Anyway, it just really brought home a lot of different instances and procedures that you need to watch out for in just routine type of work that you do in the lab.
Yeah, I would say, at least in the biology department, when you look at what most of the incidents are, they're fairly minor. And there was actually a recent one on campus that was actually not in my lab, but it was a procedure that we do regularly, and I don't think of as being actually very dangerous. But the student, in doing this procedure, just reacted in the wrong way. And rather than letting the solution that wasn't really that toxic or harmful bubble over, capped it and caused an explosion. And so it shows that you need to, at least for me, what that made me do is go back and reevaluate all of the basic procedures that I just thought were given or understood. How do you take things out of an autoclave? How do you deal with dry ice? All of these things that could actually cause pretty significant injuries if you don't use eye protection or a jacket or the extra sort of PP that you should but we just don't think of as being very dangerous things. So that's definitely, that would be the one that most recently I think comes to mind. And then I've had a series of ones of varying severity, I would say, in the field. And some of that's just, making the wrong decision, needing to catch that iguana before I leave the next day for my flight from the Galapagos, and making the bad decision to dive into a tidal pool and opening my knee up down to the patella. I was fine, but it was not the right decision to make, And so it's one of those things that then I'm like, okay, I tell my students, don't do what I did, The data is not that important, your safety is the important thing. So really just hitting home some of those ideas. But yeah, we can talk about some more. We've also got rattlesnakes, and we've had some close encounters with those, but knowing to make sure you're calm and collected, get the right identification, and have the right information to take, and know what medical facility to get to, what's the closest to where you're working, depending on what site you're at. So really having specific procedures depending on what field site you're at. But I'm happy to talk more about that if you've got questions.
So getting to that part of if you saw an accident, how did that change your mindset about safety? I guess I come from a little different background. I was trained to be an educator, so I was trained how to teach my laboratory subject area in a very safe way. They knew I was going to go out and be working with either middle school or high school kids. And I spent a lot of time in those types of classes in high school, and I could go through and talk about some horrific accidents that I kind of witnessed. But most of them go back to just literally stupidity of young kids. And I was probably one of those young kids as well. So I guess I didn't have an appreciation till safety, and then I went through my program, and they kind of did a bait and switch on me. They gave me the lecture on liability and negligence and safety, and these are the procedures. And basically the message was, you're going to get sued, you're going to lose your house, you're going to lose your car, your life is going to be totally ruined, and no one will hire you as a teacher. I was like, gosh, why didn't you tell me this when I entered the program, and I would have chose a different major? But they gave us all of the procedures, and they talked about the law, and to be negligent, the accident has to be foreseeable. So that's what I kind of look at. Is it foreseeable? And you discussed, oh, a glass bottle can break. It's foreseeable, so I'll go to plastic or something of that nature. So I kind of go through it very formally. All my safety, what we were taught, you have to teach the safety. If you don't teach it, the students aren't going to know about it. And you got to test them. And then you got to keep that test as documentation. So when you do go get sued, you can go and say, see, Billy, he knew not to stick his hand in the milling cutter. I taught him that. He performed well on the test. I observe him and all of that. But one of my big safety rules is you must report all near misses to me. To me, those are important as accidents, because if I get a couple near misses, that's telling me this is going to happen again, and this time it may not be a miss. And so it is foreseeable, and I can then develop some rules, some procedures to try to resolve that. So since high school, I was taught how to do foundry cast molten metal. I was taught it again in college. In my master's program, I oversaw a metals manufacturing lab, and I was the person who worked with the students to do that. And then I've taught it here for probably 25 years of my 30 years here. And we started experimenting with a new process, evaporatory casting, where you take styrofoam and you put a refractory slurry around it, put it in loose sand, and you just pour the molten metal in, and the metal burns the sand, the styrofoam out. And there's a big cloud of black soot that goes up, and you get a beautiful part. Automobile engines now, parts of them are made that way, and so I thought it was a procedure I need to teach. We cut all our sprues, risers, and things of that nature off, and recycle that aluminum, and it goes into a new part. But nothing in the literature, as I was reading about this, talked about all the gases that are going to get trapped in that aluminum, because that gas has to go somewhere, and it doesn't all escape. And all of the literature in doing foundry says those students should have safety glasses on, they should have a face shield on, they should have long gloves on, no longer asbestos, but that probably is what I wore when I was in high school. They should have an apron on, they should have leggings on, long pants, long sleeves. This is going to protect them. Well, and then when my students do that, I have to also look at the risk. Is this something that can kill you, or is this something that is going to give you a scratch? And obviously, if it's something that's very dangerous, I deal with it a little different. The foundry is very dangerous, so one of the rules is I'm the only one who fires up the furnace. That means I have to be present, and I hang around and I coach them through it. I never take my eyes off of the group so I watch these people do everything right. And one of the things you have to do is degas the aluminum to get the gas out of the aluminum so that they don't have porosity, also to improve the grain structure. And you take this and you plunge it down into this liquid aluminum. And it bubbles and everything's fine. Well, we were using this stuff that had an unbelievable amount of, this is just speculation on my part because I haven't found it. But we went to degas this aluminum that had gone through the other process. And the gas bubble formed so large that it shot the aluminum all the way to the ceiling, about the height of this. And there's a student with his hand all over the crucible. The glove is covered with aluminum. Protective clothing did everything it was supposed to. The aluminum goes up, and I'm going, oh, this stuff's not going into orbit, it's coming down. And that student doesn't have a hard hat on. Nothing had taught me. Industry kind of said, industry requires you to wear a coat, but in education we tend not to, that wasn't necessary, perhaps, or we weren't utilizing that. In industry you would have had a hard hat on, but all the literature in my education said just a face shield. It's foreseeable. I was lucky, it came down, nothing landed on the student's head. The foundry was shut down until I put it in order, and about 4 days later, face shields with hard hats came. And so that's kind of my message, is that idea is it foreseeable? And is there any way you can determine if it's something you didn't think was foreseeable, could it happen? And if it can happen, then what can you do to eliminate that hazard?
Well, while you're thinking about a question to shoot to the panel here, and then please ask, that's what this is all about. I did want to ask the other thing, because something that came up on this is near misses. Gary said he's keeping track of near misses. How did the other three handle near misses? And do you require them, encourage? Let's face it, this is research. We do not publish or publicize or let anybody know our mistakes. And a near miss really is a mistake. And so it's hard. It's hard for me to say, whoops, nothing happened, nobody's going to find out. I can keep that quiet. Near misses are so dangerous. How do you guys handle near misses and making sure you hear about them in your labs?
So our strategy or policy, if you will, is to have a culture where a student, an employee, doesn't feel, isn't in a bad position by being open and willing to share this information, because it's so critical for us to learn from those incidents. So I think that's really the most important thing that we do, is we promote a culture of being okay, accepting when these near misses occur, because we don't want to discourage students from saying, oh geez, I don't want to tell Dr. Gowan that this almost could have led to something terrible, because then you'll never have that communication if there's a sense that the student or employee would be fearful of coming forward. So we want to, and our institute does just that, really encourages that level of comfort and communication to make sure that we don't get these types of things swept under the rug and not really shed light on it, because it's so important to learn from all of these events in terms of how to do things in a manner that will be safer down the road.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely do the same thing. We, if somebody in my lab, if there is some sort of situation, we have weekly lab meetings, but we also do annual in-lab safety refreshers as well. We document that for liability reasons. But as a department, we have a link that you can fill out a form to report actual incidents, but also near misses. And we really encourage everybody to do that. So if there's anything and one of my students sees something, they're supposed to do that too. So we have an official record of that as well. So we're trying to, at least as a community, really encourage it. We're teaching our new grad students as they come in their grad student training to do this. And so at least there's a record of it. And then we go through and we look and see what's happening and can evaluate if procedures need to change.
Yeah, I found I used to have to train a lot of people on different pieces of equipment from different departments and things like that and other positions. And I find that grad students, people in general, they're hesitant to report near misses because they don't want to look like the doofus. They don't want to seem incompetent. And they're like, oh, after the near miss, what is it? Oh, I should have thought about that. And that's the constant thing. So when I'm training these people, what I've done, or I've tried to do, is emphasize to them how much their near misses helps me explain to other people how this could be a hazard, or identify hazards myself and keep other people safe. I try to bring the culture about that this is a learning experience. It's not saying you're a doofus. The only doofus move is to not tell them when something happens. And I also try to tell them, even if it's a paper cut, if it's something super simple, don't just assume that that's just part and parcel with the job. Let me know, and then I can possibly identify a process that we can improve. So it's part of it's implementing that culture of letting people know that we all make mistakes, it's okay, and just tell me about it so we can fix it.
And along those lines, I had a student that fell in the field, not bad, but his back was a little sore, and he didn't report it, and then months later it was still bugging him, and he couldn't get help from workman's comp. And so actually, it's really important to, even if you think you're okay, if you fall and slip or you hurt yourself, having that record can help them financially later if it does end up actually being an issue. So that's something that I also encourage my students to, if you're traveling, do the TA, the SOS insurance, but also using these incident reporting on campus, so you have documentation.
Even though I have my near misses as one of the safety rules and I promote that culture, I'm also not naive enough. My guess is I probably only get about 20% or less of the reports.
Yeah.
They're still happening and I'm not hearing about it. You do what you can.
So it seems like each of you have your own safety protocols for every unique situation, which is, I think that's probably how it has to be. But I thought maybe I'd just bring up kind of this discussion that just seems like as professors we do so many things that are reinventing the wheel constantly. I feel completely overwhelmed every day. I mean, if there's just one way to make this a little bit less and more I don't know, if you have any suggestions on making this an easier thing to happen in the laboratory and not have to have it so much fall on our personal shoulders. There are really good reasons why it should. I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't take responsibility.
There are some aids through the Environmental Health and Safety Office. There's a hazard assessment tool that tells you what you need to actually go through and assess based on the procedures, and actually built into the template, the chemical hygiene plan template, which is very hard to find, but it's there. There are some procedures, but I would also say reach out and ask other people. And I think it's also good to actually also sort of peer review each other's labs and procedures. That's something we're starting to institute in biology to see, are we missing something? Maybe you have different experiences than we do with the same. So, ask if there's something. I'm happy to share any material that I have, and it's an ever-evolving, they're ever-evolving procedures as well, so, yeah.
Yeah, and I would add, just consider reaching out to colleagues at other institutions. They might have a different vision or procedures to help mitigate and getting SOPs from labs that do similar work that you do helps you really hone in on risks that they have thought of for many, many years, and they already have some framework that you can help build your own SOPs and guidelines for safe environment in the lab.
And involve your students. They're the ones, if you have graduate students working in the lab, the undergraduates we go through the training with, but when we had to, continue to work on some of these and have better documentation, we, basically I had students that were working with certain procedures, and I worked with them where they would take the first draft and then we'd go back and meet, and then we meet as a lab. And so don't take it all on yourself. This is part of their training too. So yeah, I actively involve them a lot.
I've just started writing some hazard assessments, and I think it's a good thing now, but prior, what I've done is I've included all my hazard assessment in my procedures. Can you comment a little bit about why these should be separate documents, what the difference is? Or is that okay to have them be one document?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Personally, I found out, and it goes this way with signage for me as well, that sometimes there's just too much. And a student or a researcher, they look at 3 or 4 pages of something, they go, yeah, I've got time for that, and they move right on. So I think in many cases, it's good to have these things in separate areas, give them the nuts and bolts and let them move on. In my labs, I have very little signage. If I had signage for everything, the walls would be paper, and they wouldn't look at it. So I have a few signs up for some very critical things that they may not think about. Everybody in my lab knows that they need to wear safety glasses. Everybody knows that they need to have a lab jacket on. A few things like this. That's common stuff. So, to answer your question, it's a good call. I think it depends on how much quantity you have in there, how succinct it is, how outlined it is, and maybe just a reference to go here if you need more information.
And I'll be honest, my chemical hygiene plan is not something that my students read. That's something that I have on file. What they have is what you're talking about. So we have our protocols. We have other standard operating procedures and assessments for different groups of procedures that are more easily attainable. But at the top of each SOP, we have at least the most, the main hazards and then what PPE are required, which is always the basic, because they will for sure at least see that before they start. But yeah, I mean, you can then take all that other stuff that you need to do for EHS and for the university and use it in a way that students are actually going to read and it's going to be approachable. So we do that as well, and I'm happy to chat more about that.
Do you have rules about when people enter your lab? So this is one, I'm from engineering, so a lot of us will just walk across campus and be like, hey, we don't have this piece of equipment, can we use it for half an hour and, put your name on a paper or whatever, but that's dangerous in there. So I don't know. Any ideas about that? I feel like that's like a huge danger for our students.
No, I know.
Naive,
Well, you have to make sure they have, chemical training, and that's actually, we have collaborators from other universities that do stuff in our lab, and that is a huge pain, because especially now with the way that you have to have an A number to actually take the training and have it on record. So yeah, that's a whole other conversation. But yes, it's so we have to make sure they at least do that and they have basic PPE. But yeah, there's rules. We just try to have those conversations before they show up, and then usually I have to be a member. I have to take one of my students through and say, make sure these things are followed. But yeah.
As a side note, we have had it's really easy to get in numbers. I haven't had any trouble with that. It's just instantaneous almost. So it's good to.
Yeah, well, just to follow up there, it is all over the show. The research labs are a lot different from the educational labs. My students in the educational labs do not walk in with their safety glasses on and such like that. However, I instruct my TAs, and a lot of this, has to come through my TAs. They're instructed to have a point where, okay, everybody has PPE on. Okay, now it's safe for it to be off. And there's some interfaces there that's a little challenging. Research labs, in the past, have encouraged them to have a set of safety glasses and maybe a spare lab jacket or two right there at the front of the room. So if you have a salesperson that comes in, people that are actually coming in from facilities and other places, that's, I find, the biggest challenge, those kind of things. But I mean, it's a great question.
One of the issues, though, is some of the older labs like mine, the student offices are in the lab. And so we have a rule. It's like if you're working at your computer, you don't have to have your glasses, your gloves, and everything on. I can't have them there 24/7 and that. But anytime they're doing anything in a lab bench, any procedure, then all PPE are on. But yeah, there's only so much we can do with some of these old buildings, But yeah.
Just a comment regarding the virology labs that our institute has. We actually have signage with a picture showing the required PPE for the biosafety level to help convey that information that, hey, this is what the expectation is, and you need to have the appropriate biosafety level training. And when we do have those instances where we have a guest or a person that's not that's coming in to observe, they're always escorted, and the person being escorted is in charge of making sure that they have the appropriate PPE.
So basically, I have a manufacturing lab that's very attractive. So maybe a mechanical engineering students walking by. I got this project. I've worked 3 years as a machinist. Can I use your equipment? And basically the answer is no. If you want to use my equipment, take my 1030 class that teaches you how to safely use all this stuff. I now know you know how to use it. Maybe I'm just too mean or whatever, but I've taught too many kids who say they know how to run it and they don't. And they're just going to hurt themselves or hurt someone around them or destroy the machine. So I just kind of get a little cold. I tell the people I teach with, the other faculty, don't let anyone in my lab.
Yeah, that's kind of what, I'm less concerned about that, more just like inadvertently entering a place they shouldn't and then getting hurt because they're the wrong place at the wrong time kind of a situation. seems silly, but like we keep our lab doors locked, so maybe most people are doing that too. But
Yeah, we have ours cross-guarded,
Yeah.
so it
Yeah.
limits access to those that are authorized.
Nick, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was hoping maybe for a EH&S perspective on that exact question. So we're a biosafety level 2 lab. We try to follow all the rules. I leave for lunch, I come back, and now facilities is installing wireless repeaters while they're standing on my bench over my cultures with no PPE, no training. I mean, this seems like something that's probably more campus-wide than departmental, right? And it annoys me to no end, right? And then their questions are, well, what do you work with? Well, it doesn't matter at this point, right? I mean, you already do this. So, I don't know, I mean, is there an institutional voice that can sort of say, you know, don't do this? We put up signs, but it's not like a fence, right? It's just a sign.
I'm going to actually pass this back to Tom right behind you, because the chemistry department started out with this. Nobody walks into one of these labs without lab coat safety laws. I don't care if you're from facilities, I don't care if you're the president of the university. Nobody walks into these labs. How long did it take before that actually got to a point where it's now routine and everybody's doing it?
For the department, it's pretty quick, as long as we got kind of like, like leadership from the department head, from the deans coming down to enforce this culture. It's pretty quick. I agree with Nate. The most challenging part is, unfortunately, from the facility. Yeah, they kind of like just walk in, because sometimes we cannot be around, OPI cannot be around 24/7, so they just walk in ignoring the sign. But I can tell you for sure that any other people, like including last week, even the staff from my department wanted to do the documentation of my instrument. They have to wear PPE. Even though they only bring in the pencil paper, they have to wear PPE. So it's easy to enforce departmental personnel to follow the rule.
It took probably about 2 years for that mentality to get transferred over to the people that are coming into chemistry. And they were rabid about yelling at people that showed up. I mean, if facilities was in there standing on your lab bench fixing something, they were physically escorted out of the lab with, with wires trailing and curses and everything else.
No real points.
Well, let me clarify, I am in chemistry. And so this example is in chemistry. And I agree with Tom. That our faculty, our students, our staff, I mean, they know the rules. But it's the other entities that are more challenging. And I guess what I was looking for is, does EH&S have a voice that's being spoken to facilities specifically, saying, there's a sign up that has a requirement, that applies to you too?
I think also, like, I don't even know who to contact. You can call facilities all day and get nothing. And like, I have wires just strung across my lab right now that I found last night. I have no idea whether they're all above open water. So it's like, I left thinking, I don't know what to even do here. Obviously someone's been working in there over open water, electrical wires in and on. I feel the same way. Just have no idea who to call.
To answer your question, yes. And one thing I'd like to shoot back to the panelists, percentage-wise, what percentage of the time are you in the lab as opposed to your grad students, postdocs, working without you there?
I mean, the majority of the time they're working without me there. I'm in there daily checking in on things, but I mean, they're the ones that are get to do all the fun stuff.
I'm seldom in the lab these days. When I go in there, people get nervous or afraid I'm going to hold the pipette from the wrong side. So when I got here in 2004, I did spend much more time in the lab, engaged, doing different things, but as things have progressed, that have become further at spending much time in the lab. I just meet with the staff and students in my office. Maybe we should have meetings in the lab, wear my coat, protective glasses.
I'm in a different situation where, I mean, I'm seldom in the lab. I've got lots of labs running all the time, all week long. However, I have proxies in there. I have my TAs, and I impart upon them the importance of PPE. And to emphasize that, at the beginning of every term, I spend a lot more time walking through each lab and checking on things. And I'll call out students and I'll call out TAs. This isn't right, that isn't right. And within 2 weeks, I would say I'm at 95% compliance. So at least with basic PPE. They'll still do dumb stuff, and I try to emphasize to my TAs that they need to be able to focus on the entire lab all the time, because they may be helping a student here and somebody over here is getting ready to shove a pipette through their hand. They've got to constantly be aware. But yeah, personally in the lab, not much. And yeah.
If it's a course I'm teaching, introductory to materials and processing, I'm probably in the lab 90% of the time when the students are there. The other 5% I might be over in the classroom. If it was well, we were taught if it's a high school, under 18 years old, you're in the lab 100% of the time. You never leave. Some of the safest labs I've been in have actual power locks, where you push a button and it takes a key to turn the power back on to all the equipment. It'd be nice if that was available here. But if it's a senior design project or something of that nature, I'm probably only in that lab 5–10% of the time. It would just be because that student is in there, or those students, you have to work at minimum of 2 people. Those students are in there, and I happen to be doing something on machinery. And it just, by chance, we're in at the same time. But one of the things I end up doing as I make mental notes, and I'll even take down names and things of that nature, I have students who I repeatedly have to say, put your safety glasses on. Pull back the hair. And to me, if I have to do that during the course of a semester 3 or 4 times, guess what? When that student's a senior and they need access to the lab, and I'm not going to be in there while they're not getting in. And then I guess I feel I can get away with it, because there's an issue of, you always got this hovering over your head. If I get on this student too much, they're going to give me a bad evaluation. But now they're in senior design, someone else, I can be as mean as possible. And it's always in their safe interest, but just because they won't follow the rules, they shouldn't be given that privilege.
So I'm looking at the EH&S training matrix, and it's really impressive the number of different trainings you have for working with lasers, working with blood, working with all kinds of chemicals. But we're sending a lot of students out into backcountry environments. We have a lot of students working on rivers. We have wilderness first aid courses and swiftwater rescue courses. Why aren't those supported by EH&S?
Wow, I'm glad you said that. Let me answer Nick's question first. I think I dodged that. The science hiccup. I am going to make it my mission for the next 6 months to sit on facilities and make sure that they get. And then whoever the next group that walks into your lab without doing things right, or leaving wires over open water, or there's no excuse for standing on a lab bench. I'm sorry. So that's going to become my mission. Yes, I do have a voice at the facility. Not very loud. But the best voice is that quiet one that just never shuts up. Now to your question. I'm so glad you answered that. There was a meeting this morning for the selection committee for a field safety professional that will do nothing but look at how to get people into the wilderness first aid course if they're going to the Galapagos. And I wanted to ask Suzanne one thing. When you sliced your knee open, where was the nearest hospital and who sewed you up?
Well, I paid a little extra, $25 instead of free, to go to the guy that was trained at Duke Medical, who had a little private thing. Luckily, I wasn't at an uninhabited island. So luckily, I was at the field site, like right there, which is probably one of the reasons why I was being stupid, because it was just, I did get the iguana though. And I processed the iguana before I went and got stitched up and let it go, which I wasn't, it was all good. But anyways, no, I mean, I knew where the closest place to go was, and it wasn't that far. But it's not, yeah, that's something that I teach my students regularly. The data's not worth it. The data's not, you need to just take care of yourself. But I would say the other thing to think about if you are dealing with blood, chemicals, and those sorts of things in the field, sometimes you have to evaluate those procedures differently because of, for example, the risk of, are you going to get an infection from this sort of, reptilian blood versus heat stroke. There's other things that have to come into play. And Rachel Curry has been amazing when I'll shoot her emails and questions and say, okay, so this is what I'm thinking. And she's like, justify it, explain why this is the right course of action. Now I'm not working with what he is. So I mean, obviously, if I was working with those sorts of infectious agents, we would be making different decisions for some of these things. But yeah, I think that's wonderful. There's going to be somebody available to.
Eric, what stage is your search at?
We have received applicants. The committee met together to decide how many they're going to invite in. So we are looking at, because Thanksgiving, Christmas, finals, and the search committee are all a bunch of professors. So you know how much time you're going to have in the next 2 months to do stuff like this. We expect this person to be on the ground and running by the end of January or first part of February. Well in time for the summer research blitz. Okay. And a lot of times we talk about safety, we evolved down in the laboratories. Field safety is probably, or field research is probably 4 times as big as laboratory research on this.
Field and farm, right?
Farm, yeah.
Field.
Yeah, because our department in particular work a lot with farm animals. We work with horses and cattle. Injuries or risk of injuries is very high.
Tractors and lawnmowers, knives.
Well, that's for sure. Farm equipment and livestock animals.
They'll be working a lot with engineering and pounding in pylons and stringing wires. And so we're excited. We really are. Yes.
So on this topic of farm animal training, with EHS able to help us find some educational videos to train students, or do we have to reinvent the wheel and create our own videos?
I don't want to steal this show. This is not my goal. But we do not want to reinvent the wheel. We want to share, and that's what this is all about, is to share. How do you guys, there's individual training and then.
So my background's been manufacturing, and as you mentioned, I opened up, you said hydroponics, I opened up an aquaponics lab. So, yeah, that's okay. So I have these fish and I have these plants, and we got this bacteria, and then you got this symbiotic relationship going on, and we got to constantly measure water quality and adjust pH and those. Totally, the chemistry aspect is totally out of my realm. Fortunately, my daughter's gone through environmental engineering, and she's on speed dial, and she helps me out a lot. But what I want to mention is I reached out to your office, and Rachel came over, and so every time I run this class, she comes over and does training with those students. And every time she does some training, I pick up a little bit more as far as, oh, I can foresee this happening. And so my ability to teach that class in a safe manner is getting better and better. So yeah, you're getting these experts who have these different areas, whether it's farm animals or I would think that would be the logical place for the expert to reside to help everyone else out. And then everyone else just needs to be willing to humble themselves a little and say, I don't have all the answers, and reach out to you guys.
One quick example, the art department, did a lot of stuff way up high. They said, we need some fall protection. We were able to get people from the art that run the challenge course down in the island to come out because they deal with high stuff and people falling all day, every day. They taught the art department. So we brought them from student services to teach the art department. And that's where we want to go.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, I'd like to put a plug out for ACS, American Chemical Society.org. They've got a heap of templates, videos, all sorts of different types of resources. If you just type in ACS and health and safety or laboratory safety or something like that, if you're working in a lab, they've got a lot of resources.
Question, I assume a lot of people here have labs, and some of you may be representing your department or something here as a safety committee person, but could you say anything more about any other suggestions about how to promote safety amongst our peers in their facilities, in their labs and so on? Because I need to keep myself safe, my students safe, but we have lots of people on campus to worry about.
So we just recently, I lead our department's safety committee, and we just recently started to institute a peer lab, for annual peer lab review. And we try, for all of these things, we try to keep it something that's manageable and doable, so it's not going to take like half a day, but within an hour these people can go and go through this checklist that we put together for them to keep each other accountable as well. And then we also have annual safety agreements that we're just instituting that say you're going to make sure your chemical hygiene plan is up to date and everything, that have to be submitted before their annual review with the department head. Again, just as a regular reminder, it's not just one and done when you start, but it's continuous. Those are a couple of ways we've been just recently trying to focus on.
Susan, and is it driven by department head or faculty, or how you initiated that?
Well, I've gotten to do a lot of new Qualtrics surveys recently. But no, I mean, this is our department at some level, but this is also how we're interpreting some of the I want to say edicts, but some of the push coming from up above, and definitely in our college, the safety committee is pushing some of these things. I'm sure you guys in chemistry have heard this as well. But it's definitely, it's coming, but it's a way for us to, part of it's dealing with liability, like we just talked about before, but also just hoping to maintain a safer environment. But I would be happy to share any of that material I've been working on this semester to put together. Ours is a shortened version, and it may not be, for a farm, it may not be the right thing, and none of it hits on the field safety. That's a whole its own separate thing. This is just lab safety right now. But the contract does say you have to be up to date with all of those trainings, which would involve field as well.
Right.
So I'm in the aviation program. We have a unique lab. It's an educational lab, and I have a unique piece of equipment. It's got many names. I call it jet engine test cell. Other people call it the blast lab because we can blast things and still survive. So we have a lot of guests that come in. Before I let anybody come use my jet engine test cell, they have to submit a written plan of safety with all the equipment that they're going to be using, the hazards that are involved, and their safety equipment. And I require them to let me physically review that with them. I show them our fire suppression system, walk them to the lab, and they have to basically get a checkout before they're allowed to use the lab. Now, there's multiple events that happen. They're coming in using concentrated hydrogen peroxide as an oxidizer in hybrid rockets. They're destroying lithium batteries to the point of very slow explosions. And this happens again and again. And during each one of those events, they have to schedule with me. I'm on site. I watch them set up. I make sure that they have all their PPE, no one's breaking their rules, and they're following their own submitted plan. So I'm not always there for the whole test, but each test they do, I try and be there to ensure that they're following their own submitted plan and not violating any of my rules.
All right, well, we have exhausted our time here today. If you do have any more questions, you can send them in. I believe there's address. Please take this and really, hazard assessments are just the first step of writing an entire standard operating procedure. So, but we can't do anything until you tell us what you do in your lab. It's too diverse out there. So sit down, decide what you do in your labs, and then we just add it. We'll put people on. We have Rachel Curry that understands chemicals. We have Kurt Olson that understands biologicals. We have yet to be named person that's hopefully going to understand both how to handle livestock, tractors, and swift water rescue. Put in a lot of.
What about tractors in the river?